Welcome to your midday NTD News. I'm Tiffany Meyer. The U.S. weighing in on rising tensions between key allies in Asia after South Korea terminated a security deal with Japan.
The U.S. Assistant Secretary of Defense, Randall Schriver, expressed deep concern Wednesday with South Korea's decision to terminate its General Security of Military Information Agreement, or GSOMIA, with Japan. The termination comes on the heels of historical tensions between the two Asian nations and means that South Korea would stop directly exchanging security information about North Korea. Schriver called on South Korea's President, Moon Jae-in, to recommit to the agreement.
The United States has repeatedly made clear to the Moon administration that this decision would have a negative effect not only in the bilateral relationship with Japan, but on U.S. security interests and those of other friends and allies.
Schriver stressed that when Japan and South Korea have frictions, the only winners are other competitors. He said the recent Russian-Chinese joint aircraft patrol is a direct challenge to the U.S., Japan, and South Korea, and an attempt to leverage friction in Japan-South Korea relations.
We do call on the Republic of Korea to recommit to GSOMIA and to renew that agreement. And we also call on both sides to participate in meaningful dialogue to address their differences.
GSOMIA was signed into force in 2016 with the goal of jointly addressing the North Korean nuclear threat and growing military challenge coming from China. If South Korea does not renew the contract, the agreement will end on November 23rd. Victor Cha, former director for Asian Affairs at the National Security Council, says the only way to solve the current predicament is through high-level dialogue.
I think the real question now is not to figure out who's at fault, but what can be done between now and the end of November to try to reverse this.
A trilateral agreement on intelligence information sharing between the United States, Japan, and South Korea that was signed at the end of 2014 is still in effect. But Japan and South Korea's exchange of information will only take place through the United States, not directly. Reporting by Kitty Wong, NTD News.
MSNBC host Lawrence O'Donnell saying last night that he used unverified information on air about President Donald Trump's finances. O'Donnell says he was wrong to do so after the president's lawyer issued a notice to NBC Universal. O'Donnell said it was wrong to discuss the report on air, which he says used only a single source. He apologized for airing something he said wasn't ready for broadcast and acknowledged that it isn't good enough. He also formally retracted the story about loans President Trump received, but only after the president's lawyer sent a letter to NBC calling O'Donnell's claims false, defamatory, and extremely damaging. The letter demanded that O'Donnell and NBCU immediately and prominently retract, correct, and apologize within 24 hours. A top U.S. general said it's too early to consider a withdrawal of U.S. counterterrorism forces in Afghanistan. His remarks come at a time when U.S. and Taliban forces appear close to an agreement that would end the 18-year war.
Marine General Joseph Dunford, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, shared his perspective on the situation with reporters at the Pentagon.
So I think it's premature. I'm not using the withdrawal word right now. I'm using, we're going to make sure that Afghanistan is not a sanctuary, and we're going to try to have an effort to bring peace and stability to Afghanistan.
He added that any U.S. withdrawal would ultimately be dependent on any outcome from their talks. U.S. Secretary of Defense Mark Esper echoed a similar sentiment, saying the U.S. wants to involve Iran diplomatically, but he wouldn't say the situation has stabilized.
I'm not sure I'm ready to call the crisis over yet, but so far so good, and we hope the trend lines continue that way, and we hope that the parties, that the Iranians would agree to meet and talk and help us resolve these issues.
The Taliban said on Wednesday it was close to an agreement with U.S. officials of a new deal, one that would see U.S. forces withdraw from Afghanistan in exchange for a Taliban promise that the country would not become a haven for international militants. Negotiations have been held in Qatar since late last year over how to end the 18-year war in Afghanistan. The 9th round of talks began last week.
The Justice Department's Inspector General says former FBI Director James Comey violated FBI policies in his handling of memos documenting private conversations with President Trump. The Watchdog office says Comey broke FBI rules when he gave a memo containing unclassified information to a friend. He also instructed them to share it with a reporter. The office also says Comey failed to notify the FBI after he was fired that he had retained some of the memos at his home. Comey wrote a series of memos about conversations with President Trump. The Justice Department has already decided that it won't prosecute Comey over the matter. A U.S. Navy destroyer sailed near islands in disputed waters in the South China Sea. While it's likely to anger Beijing, the U.S. says it was done to preserve access to waterways governed by international law.
A spokeswoman for the U.S. Navy's Japan-based 7th Fleet, Commander Ryan Momsen, said the U.S. Navy vessel Wayne E. Mayer carried out the operation. She said the ship, an Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer, traveled within 14 miles of Fiery Cross and Mischief Reefs. Momsen added that the operation was conducted to challenge excessive maritime claims and to preserve access to the waterways as governed by international law. The busy waterway is one of a growing number of flashpoints in the U.S.-Chinese relationship, which include an escalating trade war, American sanctions on China's military, and U.S. relations with Taiwan. A senior Trump administration official said on Wednesday, in a visit to Iceland next week, Vice President Mike Pence will also participate in talks about China and Russia's incursions into the Arctic Circle.
Children born overseas to American parents may not automatically receive U.S. citizenship. This comes after the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services Agency released a new definition of the term residence yesterday. Under the new definition, children born to American parents who have lived in the U.S. for less than 5 years and are serving in the military or working for the federal government may no longer automatically claim citizenship. Those children can still become citizens, but their parents have to apply before the child turns 18. The policy takes effect on October 29th and only applies to children born after that date. The change does not impact anyone born in the United States. U.S. Republican Senator from Georgia, Johnny Isakson, announced he's retiring at the end of the year due to his struggle with Parkinson's and other health issues. Isakson was first elected to the Senate in 2004 and before that served in the House starting in 1999. The 74-year-old released a statement yesterday saying his health challenges are taking their toll on his family and staff. His Parkinson's disease is progressing and he's had to have a growth removed from his kidney. He's also recovering from a fall he took in July. Georgia Governor Brian Kemp will appoint a replacement until a special election next year. Isakson's retirement means Georgia will have 2 Senate seats up for grabs in the 2020 election. New York, one of the only states with rent control, may be facing some unintended consequences. NTD's Penny Zhou spoke with stakeholders in the state to learn more.
Fed up, major landlords consider exiting New York. In this recent piece by Crain's Business magazine, sources were quoted as saying that some of New York's most prolific builders are leaving Manhattan and turning to other markets such as Colorado, Utah, and Florida due to New York's climbing tax rates and increasing regulations. The state of New York passed its most recent rent regulations in June. The laws are called by many the strongest tenant protections ever, but have also drawn criticism and even a lawsuit against it.
They make sure that rent-stabilized tenants get to stay in their apartments.
New York real estate lawyer Samuel Goldberg said the new laws have made it very hard for landlords of rent-regulated apartments to raise too much rent or go back to free markets. There are nearly 1 million rent-stabilized apartments in New York. These landlords can only raise the rent by an amount set by the government. But if they push the rent above the $27.75 ceiling through other avenues, like renovating the apartment will no longer be subject to this control, which is exactly what many landlords are doing.
If the landlord felt they can raise the rent to $6,000, they would be able to do that because it would be free market. Now, the way it is it doesn't matter if the rent went above $27.75. It's still a rent-stabilized apartment because it was rent-stabilized then.
New York is the second in the country to enforce statewide rent control. The state of Oregon also passed a rent cap earlier this year. Similar rent controls also exist in some local governments in California and Maryland, but no elsewhere in the country.
the new law does not incentivize landlords or developers coming here as much as it used to.
In July, a group of landlords filed a federal lawsuit in New York, saying the rent laws violate the 5th and 14th Amendments in the Constitution. They say the government has no right to direct how owners use their private property. The lawyers say it could take 1 or 2 years for any results to show. Penny Zhou, NTD News.
Nationwide protests have been planned over the suspension of the UK's parliament. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson today confirmed the government will recess for about a month, then reopen with a Queen's speech on October 14th. The suspension of the parliament has received approval from Her Majesty.
Calls for protests come as a petition against suspending Parliament has racked up more than 500,000 signatures, with thousands of names being added by the minute. Organizations and individuals alike have announced a series of demonstrations across the UK, starting today and continuing into Saturday, using the hashtag #StopTheCoop. The front pages of British newspapers have joined in on the heated debate. Despite the outrage, some aren't taking the protests very seriously.
It happens every year.
The suspension means UK lawmakers won't have as much time to prevent the UK from leaving the EU, with or without a deal, on October 31st. Johnson says he wants a deal, but will leave without one if necessary. David Gauke, the former Secretary of State for Justice, has said it looks like next week is the only opportunity for members of Parliament to ensure they have a say before October 31st. Meanwhile, a Scottish court is hearing arguments on a case that could block the suspension of Parliament. More than 3 years since citizens voted on a Brexit referendum, the UK is heading towards its gravest constitutional crisis in decades. Britain is weeks away from breaking away from its biggest trading partner and has yet to secure a deal with Brussels to soften the impact.
British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has pledged to deliver Brexit by October 31st, do or die, making a no-deal scenario a possibility. Our reporter in London spoke with a business owner to find out how Brexit could impact them.
Chances are you've heard the words no-deal Brexit floating around. The head of the EU Council recently had this to say.
One thing I will not cooperate on is no deal. And I still hope that Prime Minister Johnson will not like to go down in history as Mr. No Deal.
As we know, the Queen approved Prime Minister Boris Johnson to suspend Parliament for 5 weeks before the Brexit deadline. This will give MPs less time to vote and debate Brexit, including passing legislation to stop a no-deal. So what could a no-deal Brexit mean for businesses in the UK?
And that means we leave the EU's legal order in 1 day.
Sietske de Groot advises businesses on how to prepare for Brexit. She made a series of Brexit maps as a visual aid.
Every sector will have to look at its regulations.
Some businesses are stockpiling or considering moving their offices abroad. These Dutch twin sisters run their drinks company Double Dutch in London. I asked them how they've been impacted by the Brexit vote.
I think for us, our biggest concern is that the UK becomes a country that is less attractive to do business with.
The company, which has 18 employees, is holding stock for twice as long as usual, 12 to 15 weeks. They are planning to move half of their production from Northern Ireland to Belgium.
It's just too much of a risk to have everything here in the UK while we export to 25 other countries as well. So it just makes sense to have it separately. So we produce here in the UK for a domestic market, and then we produce in mainland Europe for export markets.
If there's a no-deal Brexit, she said they would need to hire someone to manage their relations between the UK and EU countries and possibly have a subsidiary company in the Netherlands to manage their operations to export markets.
It's not going to affect our sales or it's not going to affect our business. It's just extra hassle and extra time and management that goes into it, and we can prepare to the best level that we can.
It's hard to predict what will unfold next, but at least now the company is growing and business is good. Jane Worrell, NTD News.
China's military deployed fresh troops to Hong Kong on Thursday in what it called a routine rotation. This comes amid speculation that Beijing might try to intervene in the ongoing pro-democracy protests there.
Speaking at a press conference on Thursday, former Hong Kong student leaders joined with pro-democracy protesters in warning the one country, two systems framework the city enjoys will disintegrate if Beijing sends in the military. Yvonne Leung, a student leader during Hong Kong's umbrella movement in 2014, said local authorities are using the same tactics they used 5 years ago.
The government is just trying to threaten the people with emergency law, with the entrance of the People's Liberation Army, and also through the use of actual non-differential attacks on students.
Protesters have made 5 demands of Hong Kong's government. They want democratic reforms, an investigation into police brutality, for Hong Kong's chief executive to step down, and for a controversial extradition bill to be killed.
As long as the government does not back down, I believe that protesters and the rallies and the different sorts of disobedience, actions of disobedience would continue.
China's state-run CCTV said the troops left Shenzhen on Wednesday evening. It said this is the 22nd rotation of the People's Liberation Army's Hong Kong garrison. However, a Hong Kong lawmaker said he didn't think the troop rotation was routine. He said given the timing, it seems it was meant to intimidate protesters. A PLA officer said the soldiers being moved there are being taught Hong Kong's laws and will aid in maintaining order there. This comes as large demonstrations are planned for Saturday, and Hong Kong nears its 3rd month of large-scale protests. Police have banned Saturday's event, citing safety concerns. Beijing has denounced the protests and made clear that forceful intervention is possible. Hong Kong Chief Executive Carrie Lam has also not ruled out the possibility of invoking emergency powers to quell the protests. NTD News.
As concerns about a possible military crackdown intensify in Hong Kong, the Hong Kong Internet Service Providers Association is speaking out. On Wednesday, it said it was troubled by reports that the government might issue an executive order to block selective websites or applications. In a statement, the association said such an order would be the end of the open internet of Hong Kong and that it would ruin the uniqueness and value of Hong Kong as a telecommunications hub and international financial center. The association has requested that the government consult industry players before imposing any restrictions. Unlike mainland China, where the internet is filtered through China's firewall, Hong Kong's internet is an open network. Hong Kong's financial district, the scene of a local rally yesterday, protesting airline Cathay Pacific staff dismissals. NTD reporter Jeremy Sandberg was on location to speak with organizers of the event.
The protest started at 4 p.m. local time on Wednesday, with speakers condemning Cathay firings and the perceived atmosphere of white terror, a popular Hong Kong phrase used to describe anonymous acts that create a climate of fear. China's communist regime demanded Cathay suspend staff involved in or who support the protests in Hong Kong.
Free Hong Kong!
Airline Cathay Dragon fired the chair of its flight attendant union, Rebecca Tsai, after she allegedly showed support for Hong Kong protesters on her personal Facebook account.
We didn't do anything wrong. You should stand up to defend your freedom of speech and defend yourself, and also for everyone. If you think you can't do it on your own, I said, don't worry, we are together, because we know that it is the future of Hong Kong.
Cathay CEO Rupert Hogg also resigned recently as a result of Cathay's policy.
It is outrageous that when the Chinese airport authority or airline authority put pressure on Cathay Pacific, and then Cathay Pacific start to sack people, dismiss people not because anything wrong with their work, but it's all about after work, especially their freedom of speech.
Ryan Lowe, a former employee of Hong Kong Airlines, was also fired for posts he made on Facebook.
Yes, because they are limiting our freedom of speech.
According to the Hong Kong Confederation of Trade Unions, at least 20 pilots and cabin crew have been fired. Protests escalated in mid-June over a now suspended extradition bill that would have allowed people to be sent to mainland China for trial in Communist Party-controlled courts. The protests have since expanded to include calls for an independent inquiry into police use of force and mounting demand for greater democracy. Following the rally, a parade began to deliver the three demands of the trade union: for Cathay to rehire workers fired over the protests, protect workers' freedom of speech, and stop the white terror among workers. The parade ended at Pacific Place in order to hand-deliver messages to Schriver, the owner of Cathay Pacific. Citizens are seeking to protect workers' rights and their freedom of speech. Jeremy Sandberg, NTD News, Hong Kong.
Now bringing us over to Italy, President Sergio Mattarella asking Italian Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte this morning to head a coalition of the Five-Star Movement and opposition Democratic Party, a move that could mark a turning point in Italy's frayed relations with the European Union.
Conte was given a mandate to try and put together a new government. He later announced that he had accepted the mandate, adding that he hoped to draw up a list of ministers in the coming days. The country is in a very delicate phase. We must get out of the political uncertainty. The global economy, especially in Europe, is slowing down also due to the current commercial tensions, in particular, as we know, between the United States and China. Conte also said that work on the 2020 budget was his priority. There are only a few weeks until the beginning of the budget session. We must immediately get to work and draw a budget that offers solid prospects for economic growth and social development. However, the incoming coalition still needs to agree on a shared policy platform and team of ministers. The tentative accord could still unravel with political party Five Star and the Democratic Party yet to agree on other top government posts besides the Prime Minister's position or reveal a common policy platform. In an added complication, Five Star has said it will put any deal with the Democratic Party to an online vote of its members. Many Five Star supporters have taken to social media to denounce a pact with the center-left, and a yes vote cannot be taken for granted. NTD News.
On a mountain in the northeastern part of Colombia, there is a village where everyone practices Kung Fu no matter how old they are. NTD reporter Xu Wenrong spoke with one of the villagers who won a silver medal at NTD's 2019 International Chinese Martial Arts Competition. Living on a mountain in an ancient-style temple, Laura Franco Gomez has been exposed to Kung Fu since she was in her mother's womb. My dad has always done martial arts and my mom too, so I came to this life with that gene. Laura has always been in love with martial arts. She started practicing it when she was 3. However, she didn't find what she was really looking for until she started practicing a traditional Chinese martial art. I have always leaned towards spirituality, and the traditional Chinese martial arts have a level of spirituality, of inner power, and a lot of energy. Since then, she has followed the school of martial arts called Senshi Praying Mantis for about 8 years, learning the 7-star continuous straight sword style. She said in traditional martial arts, it isn't only about the movement, but about managing energy through the movements.
For example, when you
push with the weapons only like this, there's a power from inside, from the energy center.
From inside, from Tentian. I like that.
To Laura, traditional martial arts is the path to spirituality because it has opened the door for her to find what is beyond the physical. Reporting by NTD News, Xu Wenrong. Trained as a lawyer, Vladimir Zelensky went on to become a screenwriter, actor, and director of the popular Ukrainian TV program Quarter 95. 3 months ago, he became Ukraine's president. NTD's Anna Varava has more on how the former comedian is doing as president.
100 days have passed since Vladimir Zelensky became the president. During this time, he managed to dissolve parliament, his party won parliamentary elections, and he tried to negotiate with Russia.
Experts say Zelensky's victory in the parliamentary elections is our biggest recent news. He received almost 60% of the vote in parliament, and now the way is open for rapid changes in various fields.
A poll of 51 Ukrainian experts gave the president's foreign policy efforts high marks. He has established contacts with EU and Canadian leaders and is expected to meet soon with President Trump. Zelensky's initiatives to bring peace to the Donbas region were also noted. Armed conflict in Donbas has claimed the lives of 13,000 since the Ukrainian government and pro-Russian separatists started fighting in 2014. The experts praise Zelensky's offer to negotiate with Russia's Vladimir Putin in Minsk and his efforts to return to the multilateral negotiations called the Normandy format. However, the experts were less keen on the president's appointments for staff to government posts and his Servants of the People party. They charged Zelensky appointed people based on loyalty rather than qualifications. And researchers also believe that the president has not done enough to prevent Russia from returning to the plenary assembly of the Council of Europe, better known as PACE. After Zelensky dissolved the old parliament, his party won a majority. The new parliament will be up and running on Thursday.
This government will need to make quick and sometimes not very popular reforms.
On presidential elections 3 months ago, Vladimir Zelensky got unprecedented amount of support. More than 73% of Ukrainians voted for him, and now he still has huge amount of trust.
Data from a study by the Democratic Initiatives Foundation back that up.
The newly elected president has the trust of 70% of citizens. No one president in the history of Ukraine had such trust.
Basically, the changes are positive. The fight against corruption is immediately noticeable. I think the new parliament will be more effective. The good news is that he travels around Ukraine and is interested in how things are in different cities.
So far, little change. The same people in power, the police use the same methods. Cases are solved, people are not arrested.
According to the study, 70% of people believe that reforms in Ukraine will be successful. Reporting by Anna Varava, NTD News, Ukraine.
Australia's Prime Minister Scott Morrison expressing concern about China's treatment of a Chinese-born Australian writer arrested on suspicion of espionage. He says they will support his rights, despite Beijing warning them not to interfere.
I am concerned, and those concerns have been...
Australia's leader says his country will stand up for an Australian arrested in China on charges of spying. Chinese-born writer Yang Hengjun was formally arrested last week on suspicion of espionage. Spying is punishable by death in China. On Thursday, Scott Morrison said his country will support Yang's rights despite being told by Beijing not to interfere.
But we do expect Australians, indeed all citizens, to have their human rights appropriately looked after. We'll stand up for our citizen and we'll expect him to be treated appropriately and his human rights to be respected. There's their own justice process that they'll follow in China, and that's appropriate. But these suggestions that he's acted as a spy for Australia are absolutely untrue. And we'll be protecting and seeking to support our citizen, as we have been doing now for some period of time. We make no apologies for standing up for one of our citizens.
Yang is a former Chinese diplomat who has been living away from his homeland for over a decade. He's been detained since January, and Australia says while embassy officials have met with him, he has not been allowed access to his lawyers or family.
Nowadays, many kids taking selfies and viewing the world through the lenses of their devices is taken as harmless fun. But according to a study looking at nearly 4,000 students, all that time spent on media may increase their risk of depression.
Cleveland Clinic Children's Dr. Joe Osterman says the study shows different types of media have different effects on kids.
They discovered that social media is not the same as TV, is not the same as video games or just being on the computer. Although most of them had an effect on depression, it was in different ways and to different degrees.
The study said media use had a negative impact on mood, especially when it came to social media and television. Other forms of media like video games and computer use had less impact on depression symptoms. Dr. Osterman says social media tends to foster thoughts of comparison and self-judgment. He says parents need to educate their children about what they see online.
You want to continually educate and point out and look for learning opportunities when they are engaged in their social media, saying, hey, do you think that's real? Here's what's really happening. This is an artificial world.
Dr. Osterman says if you notice mood changes in your child, like becoming withdrawn, irritable, or declining grades, it could be a sign of depression that needs medical attention. Emily Ho, NTD News.
And that's all for today's NTD Midday News. Join us again this evening. I'm Tiffany Meyer.